I think the most misunderstood aspect of avoidant psychology, the aspect that almost nobody discusses accurately, is what happens inside the avoidant person after the relationship ends and the defenses that protected them from feeling the full weight of their behavior finally start to crack. During the relationship, the avoidant had narrative. They had justifications. They had defensive stories that explained why their withdrawal was reasonable, why their emotional unavailability was your problem to manage, why their hot and cold behavior was justified response to your supposed neediness, why creating distance was self-preservation rather than self-sabotage. The narrative protected them from having to feel what their behavior was actually doing to you. It allowed them to maintain self-concept as fundamentally decent person while engaging in patterns that were causing genuine harm to someone who loved them. But here's what the narrative couldn't protect them from forever: themselves. Specifically, the part of themselves that watched what they were doing to you and couldn't fully silence the knowledge that it was wrong, couldn't fully extinguish the awareness that you deserved better, couldn't completely override the recognition that the person in front of them was loving them generously and honestly, and they were responding with patterns that were slowly destroying that person's confidence, their peace, their sense of worth. The avoidant contains multitudes that their defended exterior prevents you from seeing. There's the defended system, the one that withdraws, that creates distance, that reframes your legitimate needs as excessive demands, that protects itself from vulnerability at the cost of your well-being. But there's also something else operating beneath that system, something that witnesses the damage being done and accumulates record of it that the defenses cannot permanently erase. Call it conscience. Call it self-awareness that exists beneath the defensive layer. Call it the part of them that knows who they actually are beneath the person their wounds have made them behave like. This witnessing part accumulates evidence throughout the relationship. Every time they withdrew and watched you reach out, trying to bridge the distance, it recorded it. Every time they went cold and watched your confusion and hurt, it recorded it. Every time they dismissed your needs and watched you minimize yourself to make them comfortable, it recorded it. Every time they created chaos when you were trying to create closeness, it recorded it. Every time they saw you investing everything in relationship they couldn't sustain and said nothing about their own incapacity, it recorded it. And when relationship ends, when the external distraction of active relationship is gone, when the defensive narrative is harder to maintain because you're no longer there to be blamed for difficulties, when they're sitting alone with the accumulated record their witnessing self has been keeping, the self-hatred arrives. Not gradually, not gently, but with the force of everything that was suppressed throughout the relationship, finally demanding acknowledgement. They hate themselves for what they've done to you. Not all of them, not always, not in ways they'll necessarily admit or express, but in ways that are real and that consume them and that represent the natural consequence of witnessing yourself harm someone who didn't deserve the harm and being unable to justify it away anymore. Understanding why this self-hatred develops, what it actually looks like in their daily experience, why it's so consuming, and what it means for both of you, requires understanding the specific gap between who they knew themselves to be and who they behave like throughout the relationship, and the devastating moment when that gap can no longer be bridged by defensive narrative. Why the self-hatred arrives after the relationship ends rather than during it. The avoidant self-hatred about what they did to you doesn't typically arrive while relationship is active. It arrives after, often long after, when specific conditions make it impossible to continue avoiding the full weight of their behavior. Understanding why timing works this way reveals crucial information about how their defensive system operates and what finally overwhelms it. During the relationship, active defensive system works constantly to reframe harmful behavior as justified response, you being there to blame makes self-confrontation unnecessary. While you were present, while relationship was active, the avoidant had external target for every uncomfortable feeling. When they felt guilty about their withdrawal, they could reframe it as necessary response to your clinginess. When they felt bad about their coldness, they could justify it as protecting themselves from your excessive demands. When they recognized they were hurting you, they could tell themselves your hurt was about your own issues, your attachment anxiety, your inability to tolerate normal levels of independence. Your presence in the relationship provided constant material for defensive reframing. Every time their conscience threatened to break through the defenses, they could look at your behavior and find something, anything, to justify their own. Your pursuit became evidence you were codependent. Your expressions of hurt became evidence you were too sensitive. Your needs became evidence you were too demanding. The active relationship kept their defensive system supplied with justification material that prevented self-confrontation from occurring. But when you're gone, the material disappears. There's no one to blame. There's no current behavior to misinterpret as justification for past harm. There's just them, alone with the record their witnessing self has been keeping, with no external target to deflect accountability onto. The loss itself strips away distraction that was preventing them from sitting with what they actually did. During relationship, they stayed busy managing the dynamic, managing your needs, managing their own defenses, creating distance, then returning when distance became too absolute, generating the hot and cold cycles that kept relationship in constant state of turbulence that required ongoing management. This constant management was itself distraction. They were so focused on managing the present that they couldn't sit with full assessment of accumulated pattern. But after relationship ends, the management is over. There's nothing to do, no dynamic to maintain, no distance to create or close. The busyness that served as buffer between them and self-confrontation is gone. And without that buffer, they're forced into stillness, where the full weight of what they did can finally be felt. The stillness is unbearable. The self-confrontation it enables is devastating. This is why avoidants often engage in compulsive activity after relationship ends, taking on extra work, pursuing new distractions, filling every available moment with noise and activity. They're trying to recreate the busyness that protected them from self-confrontation. But the busyness doesn't work as effectively once the relationship is gone, because the specific distraction of managing relationship dynamic is no longer available. Encountering you after the ending, seeing how you've changed, how you've healed, how you've moved forward without them, removes the defensive narrative that you were the problem and forces them to see the harm their patterns caused. If they encounter you after ending, whether in person or through social media or through mutual friends, seeing you provides devastating evidence. If you're doing well, if you're healing, if you're building life without them and seeming lighter and freer than you seemed during relationship, this observation destroys the narrative that you were the unstable, needy, demanding one. You're clearly fine. You're clearly capable of healthy functioning. The problems in relationship weren't about your excessive needs or your inability to handle normal independence. The problems were their patterns, their unavailability, their inability to show up consistently. Your healing and your forward movement is proof that they were wrong about you. And if they were wrong about you, they can't maintain the narrative that justified their behavior. The justification collapses and what it was preventing surfaces. The full awareness of what they did to someone who didn't deserve it. Specific memories intrude without warning and resist the defensive reframing that previously made them manageable. After relationship ends, memories surface with different quality than they had during active relationship. Specific moments that their defensive system previously reframed as justified or as your fault now appear in their consciousness without the protective reframing. They remember the specific look on your face when they withdrew unexpectedly. They remember that conversation where you expressed need and they deflected. They remember the night you cried and they couldn't comfort you. They remember the time you asked whether they actually cared about you and they gave answer that was designed to neither commit nor reject. These memories come without the justifications attached. Just the raw image of someone who loved them being hurt by their behavior. Just the clear recognition that they caused the pain they're remembering. Just the devastating awareness that the person in that memory deserved better and received worse because of their patterns. The memories don't come with escape routes anymore. They just come, and they keep coming. And each arrival adds to the accumulating weight of self-hatred. What the self-hatred actually looks like in their daily experience and how it consumes them. The avoidant self-hatred is an abstract intellectual recognition that they behaved badly. It's pervasive emotional experience that infiltrates every aspect of their daily life in ways they cannot control or escape, regardless of how desperately they try to manage it. They wake up with it. Specific sinking feeling that arrives before they're fully conscious, carrying weight of what they did before the day has even begun. Before they remember where they are, or what day it is, or what they need to do, the feeling is there. Heaviness, dread, the particular quality of shame that's different from guilt. Guilt is about what you did. Shame is about who it reveals you to be. They did things that hurt you. Things that were wrong, things that demonstrated failure of care and consistency and basic human decency towards someone who was giving them everything, and they knew better. That's what makes the shame so heavy. They knew better while they were doing it. The witnessing part of them was watching, recording, knowing it was wrong. And they did it anyway because their defensive system was more powerful than their conscience. Waking up with this knowledge before the day begins sets tone of shame that colors every subsequent experience. They replay specific interactions with you compulsively, not just generally regretting the relationship, but specifically remembering particular moments of harm with excruciating detail. The self-hatred isn't general, it's specific. They're not just thinking, I wasn't a good partner. They're thinking about Tuesday afternoon, 3 months into the relationship when you needed emotional support and they made excuse to get off the phone. They're thinking about your birthday when they showed up distracted and left early and later rationalized it as you being too demanding about birthdays. They're thinking about the conversation where you finally broke down and said you didn't know if they actually cared about you, and they gave rehearsed answer about needing space to process feelings, rather than simply saying, I care about you deeply, and I'm sorry I haven't been showing it. They're thinking about the specific moments when they had choice, could have stepped towards you instead of away, could have offered comfort instead of withdrawal, could have been honest instead of defended, and they chose the wrong thing. The specificity is what makes it consuming. Abstract regret can be managed. Specific vivid memories of particular moments of harm resist management completely. They find themselves wanting to apologize, not just once, but repeatedly, in different formulations, trying to find words adequate to what they did, while simultaneously knowing no apology is sufficient, and that reaching out serves their own need for relief, more than your need for anything from them. The self-hatred creates pressure to act, to do something, to find some way to address the record of harm they're carrying. Apology seems like only available action. They compose messages in their head or in draft folders on their phone. Long, detailed apologies where they try to name every specific thing they did wrong and acknowledge its impact. Shorter, more direct apologies where they try to express the weight of their regret without overwhelming you with their processing. They draft and delete and redraft. Sometimes they send something, sometimes they don't. But what drives this compulsion isn't primarily concern for your healing. It's their need to discharge some of the pressure of self-hatred through acknowledgement. They want to confess, want to name what they did, want some acknowledgement that they've recognized the harm. This compulsion is mostly about them, about their need for relief from self-hatred, rather than about what would actually serve you. And on some level, they know this, which adds another layer of self-hatred. They can't even want to apologize without it being partly selfish. The self-hatred manifests as hypervigilance about their behavior in all subsequent relationships and interactions. They see their patterns everywhere and cannot engage in any relationship without watching themselves for signs of repetition. After what they did to you, they cannot enter any relationship without watching themselves for signs they're doing it again. They become hyper-aware of their own behavior. When they feel the impulse to withdraw, they notice it and hate themselves for feeling it. When they catch themselves reframing someone else's legitimate need as excessive demand, they recognize the pattern and feel disgust at their own instincts. When they create distance in new relationship and watch new person respond with familiar pain, they feel wave of recognition and self-hatred. I'm doing it again. I'm hurting another person the same way I hurt them. The hypervigilance is exhausting and ultimately ineffective without therapeutic intervention, because recognizing the pattern isn't the same as having developed capacity to respond differently. They watch themselves repeat patterns they hate themselves for having, while being unable to stop the repetition through awareness alone. They experience it physically, not just as emotional or cognitive experience, but as actual physical symptoms of shame that they carry in their body throughout their days. Shame lives in the body. The avoidant carrying accumulated self-hatred about what they did to you doesn't just think about it, they feel it physically. Tightness in chest when specific memories surface. Nausea when they think about particular moments of harm. Physical sensation of heat or cold that accompanies acute shame. Heaviness that affects how they move through the world, making them seem physically burdened to anyone who observes them closely. Some people experience shame as burning sensation in face or chest. Others experience it as profound fatigue. Shame is exhausting to carry. Others experience it as disrupted appetite, disrupted sleep, disrupted basic functioning as physical system responds to chronic emotional burden. The physical experience of shame is real. The body is carrying what the mind is processing, and they're carrying this weight through every day, every hour, with no relief, because the memories don't stop and the self-knowledge doesn't diminish, and the gap between who they knew they should be and how they actually behaved doesn't close just because time passes. They compare who they are now, this person who did these things, to the person they believe themselves to be at their best, and the gap between these two versions creates identity crisis that their defensive system cannot fully resolve. They have image of themselves as good person, as someone who is fundamentally decent and caring and capable of genuine connection. This self-image was built over lifetime through all the evidence of their goodness, times they were kind, things they did right, ways they showed up in other areas of life. But what they did to you contradicts this self-image. Good people don't systematically withdraw from someone who loves them. Decent people don't create cycles of hope and disappointment that erode their partner's confidence. Caring people don't dismiss legitimate needs as excessive demands to protect their own comfort. The contradiction between self-image and actual behavior creates identity crisis, which is the real version. The person they believe themselves to be, or the person they were during relationship with you. The self-hatred is partly this crisis of identity, the devastating recognition that they were capable of behavior that contradicts their self-concept. that their wounds were strong enough to make them hurt someone they cared about in ways they would never have believed themselves capable of. Why the self-hatred is so much more intense with empaths, specifically, and what this reveals. The avoidant self-hatred is most intense and most consuming when directed at what they did to empathic partners specifically, not because empaths are more fragile, but because empaths are more visibly, obviously, undeniably affected by their behavior in ways that make denial impossible. Understanding why empaths create more intense self-hatred helps you understand what your specific presence revealed about their patterns. Empaths feel everything openly. Their pain was visible and real and undeniable in ways that defended partners' pain isn't, making it impossible for avoidant to convincingly maintain that their behavior wasn't causing harm. When an avoidance behavior causes pain to defended partner, the pain might not be fully visible. Defended person might minimize, might retaliate rather than show hurt, might create their own distance that makes it harder to see the direct impact of avoidance behavior. But you showed your experience. When you were hurt, the hurt was visible. When their withdrawal confused you, the confusion was evident. When their coldness affected you, the effect was present in your face and your voice and your energy in ways they could not ignore or convince themselves weren't there. This visibility meant they watched you being hurt by their behavior in real time, throughout relationship, unable to maintain convincing story that you were fine or that their behavior wasn't the cause of your distress. The empath's visible experience of their behavior removes one of avoidance' primary defensive tools, plausible deniability. They knew what they were doing to you, they saw it, and they continued anyway. This knowledge, that they saw the harm and continued, is source of most intense self-hatred. Empaths often stay longer than people with stronger defensive structures, which means they absorbed more cumulative harm. The avoidant knows you endured more than you should have had to endure. Your patience, your capacity for compassion, your understanding of their wounds, your commitment to the relationship despite their patterns, all of these qualities that are genuinely beautiful about you, also meant you endured more than someone with less capacity for empathy and compassion would have endured. You stayed through multiple cycles. You kept reaching out. You kept trying to understand. You kept offering what they couldn't accept. You gave them more chances than they deserved. And they knew this while it was happening. They knew you were absorbing harm you shouldn't have been absorbing. They knew your staying was evidence of your extraordinary capacity for love, rather than evidence that their behavior was acceptable. And they continued the behavior anyway, taking advantage of your capacity for compassion in ways they're now deeply ashamed of. The knowledge that you endured more because you were more loving, that your love was used against you by being mistaken for willingness to accept infinite mistreatment, is source of specific consuming shame. The empath often reflected their best self back to them while they were behaving at their worst. The contrast between who you saw them as and how they were acting is unbearable to sit with. You saw them clearly. You saw their potential. You saw their capacity for depth and connection and genuine intimacy. You believed in them. You held space for the person they could be. You reflected back to them the version of themselves they wanted to be, worthy of love, capable of genuine connection, someone whose wounds didn't determine their character. And while you were doing this, while you were loving them for who they could be, they were behaving in ways that contradicted everything your love reflected back to them. The gap between who you saw them as and who they were actually being is devastating to contemplate. You believed in them more than they deserved to be believed in. You loved version of them they hadn't yet become. And they responded to this extraordinary generosity of vision by demonstrating, through their continued patterns, that they weren't yet the person you saw them as being. The shame of this, of receiving someone's belief in your best self while behaving at your worst, is almost unbearable. Empaths communicate their experience with clarity and honesty. You probably told them exactly how their behavior was affecting you, which means they cannot claim they didn't know. You likely expressed your experience honestly throughout relationship. You told them when their withdrawal hurt you. You explained how their inconsistency affected your sense of security. You named what their hot and cold behavior was doing to your confidence. You communicated clearly, because that's what empaths do. They process experience verbally and honestly and in good faith, believing that sharing experience is how partners find mutual understanding. This communication meant they knew. They knew what their behavior was doing to you because you told them. You gave them information. You were honest about impact, and they didn't change. They couldn't change. Their wounds were too powerful, but they didn't even fully try to change. They kept doing what they were doing while knowing exactly what it was costing you. This knowing, which your communication made impossible to claim away, is source of some of most intense self-hatred they carry. They cannot say they didn't know. You made sure they knew, and they continued anyway. What their self-hatred actually means, and what it doesn't mean for your healing and your future. The avoidance self-hatred about what they did to you is real and significant and worth understanding. But understanding it doesn't create any obligation on your part and shouldn't change how you navigate your own healing. Understanding what their self-hatred means and doesn't mean helps you use this knowledge appropriately. Their self-hatred confirms your experience was accurate. You weren't imagining the harm. You weren't being too sensitive. You weren't exaggerating what their patterns were doing to you. Their internal response to their own behavior is validation of your external experience of it. If they merely had minor regrets about relationship not working out, if they generally wished things had been different without experiencing genuine self-hatred, this would suggest the harm wasn't significant, that their behavior wasn't as problematic as it felt, that maybe you were overreacting. But their actual self-hatred, the depth and the specificity and the consuming quality of it, confirms that something genuinely harmful was occurring. Their system knows what they did was wrong. Their witnessing self recorded the harm in real time and is presenting the evidence now. This confirmation validates your experience completely. You weren't imagining it. You weren't too sensitive. The harm was real, and their internal response to their own behavior confirms its reality. Their self-hatred doesn't create obligation for you to forgive, to reconcile, to provide absolution, or to do anything that prioritizes their psychological relief over your continued healing. This is crucial. Their suffering about what they did is theirs to manage. You are not responsible for providing relief from their self-hatred. You don't owe them the forgiveness that would make them feel better. You don't owe them the reconciliation that would give their suffering meaning. You don't owe them acknowledgement of their remorse, response to their apologies, or any engagement that serves their need to discharge the pressure of self-hatred at your expense. Their self-hatred is natural consequence of their behavior. It's accountability arriving through internal process rather than through external intervention. This internal accountability is appropriate. It's what should happen when someone harms another person repeatedly. But the arrival of accountability doesn't create claim on you or obligation to participate in their processing. Their healing from self-hatred requires their own therapeutic work. It is not your job. Their self-hatred doesn't mean they've changed or developed capacity for healthy relationship. Recognition of harm and capacity for healthy future relationship are entirely different things. The most important distinction to maintain is between remorse and transformation. They can hate themselves genuinely for what they did to you while being completely unchanged at the level of patterns and nervous system response. The self-hatred is about the past, specific recognition of specific harm that occurred. Transformation is about the future, developed capacity to respond differently when wounds are activated in intimate relationship. Remorse doesn't create capacity. Hating yourself for withdrawing doesn't give you nervous system regulation that allows you to stay present when intimacy triggers your fear. Recognizing that you dismiss someone's needs doesn't automatically develop empathy that would prevent you from doing it again. They can be genuinely consumed by self-hatred about what they did to you while being completely incapable of doing differently in next relationship without sustained therapeutic intervention. Their self-hatred is evidence of conscience. It is not evidence of transformation. Understanding their self-hatred helps you release any remaining belief that you are the problem. Their internal experience confirms you were never the problem. Their patterns were always the problem. Their wounds were always what prevented healthy relationship. The self-hatred they're experiencing is directed at themselves, at their patterns, their defensive system, their inability to show up differently, despite knowing they should. It is not directed at you. If you had been the problem, if your needs were truly excessive, if your empathy was truly pathological, if your love was truly suffocating, they wouldn't be hating themselves for what they did to you. They'd be relieved to be free of you. The direction of their self-hatred confirms the truth. You were never the problem. You were someone who loved them genuinely and well, and they were incapable of receiving or honoring that love appropriately. Their wounds were the problem. Their defensive patterns were the problem. Their incapacity for the intimacy you were offering was the problem. Their self-hatred knows this, even if their defensive statements during the relationship suggested otherwise. The most powerful thing you can do with knowledge of their self-hatred is nothing. Continue building your life, continue healing from what they put you through, and allow their internal accountability to be sufficient consequence without you needing to witness it, respond to it, or derive satisfaction from it. You don't need their self-hatred to confirm you are right. You already know you are right. You don't need them to suffer, to feel that justice has occurred. Their self-hatred isn't justice you are owed. It's just psychological consequence of their own behavior finally becoming undeniable to them. And you don't need to do anything with knowledge of it except use it to complete your healing. Use it to confirm your experience was real. Use it to eliminate remaining doubt about whether you were too demanding or too sensitive or too much. Use it to understand that the person who hurt you isn't simply villain who felt nothing about the harm they caused. They're a wounded person who caused genuine harm and who now lives with genuine consequence of that harm. This understanding doesn't excuse what they did. It doesn't minimize your pain. It doesn't create obligation or reconciliation or forgiveness on any particular timeline. It simply makes the experience more fully comprehensible and therefore more fully processable. They hate themselves for what they did to you. And you get to take that knowledge, file it as confirmation that your experience was real and significant and worth grieving, and then walk forward into life you're building without them. Their self-hatred belongs to them. Your healing belongs to you. These are separate processes that don't require each other to move forward. Carry what serves you from understanding their experience. Release the rest. And keep building the extraordinary life that proves, beyond any doubt, that you were never the problem. You were always the answer. And everything they lost when they lost you is being found again, in better form, with better people, in better relationship with someone whose wounds haven't prevented them from recognizing and honoring what you are while they still have the opportunity to keep it.